Discussions about web accessibility are usually focused on the technical challenges, but the real roadblocks are often inside your organization. You may have an accessible site, but do you have the workflow to fill it? Learn about the organizational changes needed to support complete content accessibility. As co-founder at WebMeadow, our next speaker helps progressive organizations develop strategies to make the world a better place. Please welcome Eileen Webb.
I'm here to talk about integrating accessibility, planning content for everyone. So when we talk about accessibility, what does that mean for the web? Because when we as a culture talk about disability, we tend to think about people in wheelchairs, and being in a wheelchair doesn't actually affect how you use the web. So when we say disability, what does that mean for the web? Cognitive disabilities, cognitive impairments, that's usually learning disabilities, dyslexia, things like attention deficit disorder. Cognitive issues come into play when we have bad formatting, when we have really dense language, when we use things like jargon. Anything that makes your content hard to understand, that's going to come into play with a cognitive impairment. Another kind of impairment is hearing impairment. About 20% of adult Americans have some form of hearing impairment. For people over 65, if you serve older audiences, it goes up to a full 1/3 of the population. Vision impairment. About 22 million Americans, that's just under 10%, have some form of visual impairment that cannot be corrected with glasses. That number's a lot smaller if you look at people who are legally blind, but it's actually growing because about 40% of people with diabetes have some form of retina damage. And as I'm sure you're aware, diabetes is one of our largest national health crises. And then last, we've got motor disability. That's fine motor impairment. That's people who are not using a mouse, generally, people who are using keyboard to navigate the web. That can be anything from carpal tunnel to ALS, Parkinson's, voice-controlled software. That could just even be someone who injured a finger or a wrist. And we don't actually have good numbers for the number of people who are doing this because someone who uses their keyboard in the morning because that's when their arthritis is bad, that kind of stuff doesn't show up on a survey at all. So in summary, somewhere between 18 and 132% of your users are navigating your website with a disability. It doesn't actually matter what the real number is because it has not been and it will never be zero. People who have issues seeing or issues hearing or wading through your jargon, they have always been and they will always be a significant piece of your audience. So how can we make sure that your content is accessible to all of your users? I have 3 core beliefs for making accessible content, and the first is progress, not perfection. I think that accessibility is not a checklist, it's an intention. I don't think it's helpful to think of accessibility as a pass-fail, as a checklist that you do or don't do. And partly that's because there's actually a gradient of accessible content. It's not a pass-fail. It's partly because it's really discouraging to think about it like that. But I also want to shift instead to thinking about accessibility as something where if you realize that you're not doing it, you don't just sort of give up and say, well, we failed, too bad. Instead, you sort of admit your mistake and you don't blame people and you don't berate yourself. You actually correct it, fix it, and move on. Like all content strategy, this work is about progress and not perfection. A big piece of progress and not perfection is to start small. And trying for everything at once, trying to fix everything, is just a really quick path to feeling discouraged. So instead, pick just one small thing, especially something that you don't have to get permission from someone else to fix, just a little thing, and fix that, and fix it across the board, and then you can point at it, and you can say, look, we fixed that. It's not actually that hard, and then move on. The second of my core principles is to normalize accessibility. So Patty Moore is an industrial designer. She's focused on aging, and she works largely with designing things like hospital environments and senior facilities, even things like rehab and public transit. You're probably familiar with her work without knowing it because she designed the original set of OXO Good Grips products. She has promoted the idea that there shouldn't be 2 sets of products, one for disabled people and one for sort of the normal, fit, and agile population. So a nice, easy example of this is that you could call this a handicap ramp for wheelchair people who can't use their legs. You could also call it a ramp. It's an alternative to the stairs. Everyone can use it. Everyone will use it. Person in a wheelchair, person with a twisted ankle, pregnant woman, woman carrying a box of books. It's a ramp. So Patty Moore uses the term universal design for things like this, and she's saying that the affordances that we build in the name of accessibility make the products more useful for everyone. And so when we start thinking about things like plain language and better formatting and clear writing, it's pretty clear that the idea of universal design makes a lot of sense for web content too. And the third principle is weaving it in from the beginning. I think that a big part of normalizing accessibility is that we can't see it as an add-on or like a phase 2. We have to find ways, even small ways, to make accessibility part of the creation process the first time. Because A, there is never budget or energy to go back and fix stuff later. Like, how many of you have actually ever completed a phase 2 project? And B, framing accessibility as a special, like, other part of the process, it keeps it at arm's length, and it encourages this mindset that people who need affordances are not your normal users, that they are kind of freaks and weirdos. And I don't want to encourage that. So those 3 principles can be applied to all of the content that you create, but I'm going to talk about 3 of the worst offenders when it comes to accessibility. So we're going to start with video and audio. Video and audio are like the new hotness right now because, I mean, it's for good reason. Like, it's pretty compelling to watch a video of someone demonstrating a new product or, traveling down a path on a beautiful road. Like, people like watching things and people like hearing things explained. It's very compelling to watch someone learn stuff. And the technology needed to make videos and make good audio is getting cheaper and easier to use every day. But if you have vision issues or hearing issues, video and audio, really not that great. Fortunately, they share a pretty simple solution, which is transcripts. So transcripts are really easy to outsource. You literally just send a file to a transcription company, of which there are many, and they send you back a transcript. That's it. That's how it goes. And you send these files, and all you have to do when you get them back is proofread them. If you have acronyms or complex names, then you'll have to sort of proofread them more carefully. But that's the whole process. Send a file, get back a file, you're done. The cost estimate for clean audio is about $1 a minute, which you're like, oh, $1 a minute. Wait, is that cheap or is that expensive? Dirt freaking cheap. It's that's nothing. If you're producing a 20-minute video every week, that's $100 a month to get the transcripts done. And if you have the budget to produce a 20-minute video every week, you have the budget to add $100 a month to get the transcripts made for that. If you don't have the budget to get $100 a month, you can do transcription in-house. It's not it's particularly hard. It's kind of time consuming. You can estimate about 5 to 1. So a 20-minute video will take about an hour and a half, maybe 100 minutes to transcribe, but it's not hard. You can just do it, and then you have a text file and put it up on the website. So in terms of weaving it in from the beginning, a really important thing to think about with transcripts is that we need to not post the video or audio on the website until the transcript is ready to go up with it. It can't be an afterthought or we're going to do this next week, because next week never happens. So we have to think of the audio or video as being only one half of the content. It's not ready for the website until both pieces are ready. So this sounds really good, right? Heck yeah, transcripts. But maybe you live in the real world. I don't know. So maybe you fake a transcript. Think progress, not perfection. If the audio is from a speech or a press conference, who wrote the answers to the press conference questions? Who wrote the speech? Can you put up the original text? If the video was made from a script, can you put up the script instead? It's not going to match perfectly the final product, but it is better than nothing. If you put up nothing, what you're doing is you're sending the very clear message to those users that this product and this content was intended for all of our other users, but not for you. That is a jerk move. And you guys, you are fine, upstanding citizens. I see it in your eyes. You are not jerks. I'm not going to lie to you that transcripts are super easy. You just do this one thing and you're done. They are real work, but there's real value and ROI. Sorry to use the term ROI. It's a dirty word in my world, but there's real ROI in this work. really even beyond the surface. For example, in terms of universal design, I think of transcripts as being like the wheelchair ramp of web accessibility. Everyone uses them. I am sure that every single one of us has, at some point, you click over to an article that you're like, ooh, this sounds interesting, and then there's a video, and you're like, oh, man, I don't want to read the video right now. I just wanted to read a little thing. So there are tons of reasons for your users to want to read something instead of watch a video. So, for example, like you've got people in noisy places and quiet places. You've got people who are just not strong with written English, people with crappy data plans for whatever reason. And that's before we even get to Google and SEO. Transcripts are amazing for SEO. You do want people to find your content, right? Do you want people to find your website? Along with containing all of your keywords in a variety of appropriate contexts with natural language and all of the relevant topics worked right in, like transcripts are literally exactly what Google is training their algorithms to find. Like that's what Google is trying to teach everyone to use is natural language. So you can include a transcript for your video, and all of a sudden the people like can find your content, and then you've got sort of double duty. You've got videos that sort of do the sexy stuff. Oh God, I'm really sorry. I'm trying to eliminate that word from my vocabulary. Retcon that snazzy stuff. This is like my own personal mission. So you say snazzy stuff, and then so yes, you got snazzy stuff, and then you also got transcripts. So they're really useful on a lot of levels. So transcripts. PDFs. So transcripts are great. We're going to talk about the big grody ogre of accessible content, which is PDFs. A lot of organizations put a lot of content in PDF format because it's pretty easy. Like it looks like print. It's pretty, I don't know, saving a PDF is like a really tiny step, and then you put it on the website and you're like, yay, this content is on the website. So I got kind of bad news for you. PDFs, not really accessible. I don't know, kind of accessible? It's complicated. So here's the deal. PDFs, back in the olden days, 3 years ago, PDFs were profoundly inaccessible. A PDF is fundamentally a picture of a document. So like a screen reader can't read it, it can't like look at the text in it because there's no text, it's a picture of a document. Like remember 3 years ago, it used to be impossible to copy and paste text out of a PDF? It's the same thing, it's just a picture. But then Adobe expanded the PDF standard, and so now it's still a picture, but there's like code behind the picture. So now you can select text, and there are headers, and there's alt text on the images. Like it's pretty good. So a person with a screen reader like can actually get to the content inside a PDF. But two catches. One is that you have to make the PDF accessible. It is not accessible by default. And then two, this is a pretty big one. Even if you make the document the most accessible thing in the whole world, like a model of what an accessible PDF should be, it is not fully accessible on any mobile device. So like VoiceOver, which is Apple's screen reader device, and TalkBack, which is Android's screen reader device, they can't read the accessibility tags on PDFs. They can like mostly read the basic content, but they can't see the alt text on the pictures. They can't jump from header to header. They can't sort of move through the document smoothly. They cannot fill out forms. Like it's like the pit of despair. Why does this matter at all? Let me remind you of a few statistics. 17% of American adults use their phone as their primary or only access to the internet. Those numbers jump to 42% for Hispanic Americans, 51% for Black Americans. Low-income households, 50% of low-income households, especially those without a college degree, the phone is the only access to the internet. And those numbers are from a couple years ago. That's like 2012 numbers. They're just going up. And so you add in stats like that 31% of visually impaired Americans live below the poverty line. When you start to compound minority statuses, if you've got non-white, non-rich, disabled, you're basically guaranteeing that if your content isn't available to people on mobile, your content isn't available to people. So I would love to say to you, just like stop putting content in PDFs, just stop. But we live in the real world, so getting content into PDFs is probably the smoothest workflow you have right now. Like stopping that is probably nothing short of a coup. And so progress, not perfection. How can we make it better? First, do the work to make your PDFs accessible. It's not a huge amount of work. It's not that big a deal. You just got to shift your process a little bit. One, create the PDFs digitally. You're probably already doing this, but just in case, don't print stuff out and then scan it. Like, create it digitally, natively from the source file. So like export as PDF, save as PDF, do that. Two, in your source file, learn to use the styles menu. That's like capital S styles. It's that drop-down menu in Word or Pages or whatever your word processor is that has the heading levels and the body text and stuff, rather than manually formatting everything, because that helps make accessible content. And then third, the latest version of Adobe Acrobat Pro, which I believe is 11, XI11, yes. It has an accessibility wizard in it, and you can, it'll walk you through like the steps of creating an accessible PDF. You put alt tags on, you put page titles on. It'll make sure that the headers are set in the right way. So find like the single person in your office who has like a legally licensed version of the latest version of Adobe Acrobat Pro, and just run through the accessibility wizard on the PDFs you create. It's not a huge deal. It doesn't take a long time. Just do that one thing. And then, when you put the PDFs up on your website, write some summary text so that people know what's inside them. Don't make people suffer through downloading the PDF and like go through the terrible experience of kind of, if they're on this terrible little mobile phone that doesn't have a good experience for it, don't make them suffer through the digital experience of like crappiness just so that they can find out they downloaded the wrong PDF. In terms of universal design, SEO-wise, search engines crawl PDFs now. You know this, right? Because like in your Google search results, you start seeing PDFs in there, which is great. Because robots can't read pictures, and so the work that you're doing to make your PDFs accessible to search engines or to people is also making them accessible to search engines. And then document summaries are also amazing because all of your users benefit from having document summaries. Like, why wouldn't you want all of your users to look at a list of 7 or 8 PDFs and know that they're downloading the right one the first time? So in short, transcripts on videos and audio, and then make your PDFs accessible, write teasers. It's not that hard. It's not like a huge amount of work. So I'm not like a super detailed specialist in accessibility. It is not the niche focus of my career. I'm not a leader in the field. I am oddly kind of considered like an expert-ish in accessibility. I literally think 50% of that is because I remember to bring it up in conversation, which is depressing but true. And so in terms of weaving it in from the beginning, this is a terrible phrase, but I have a big ask for you. I'm gonna ask you to be that guy. Don't be obnoxious about it. But one of the biggest barriers to creating accessible content is just that people don't think about it. It's just not part of their regular conversations. I mean, before 3 minutes ago, like 2 minutes ago, how many of you knew that iPhone's VoiceOver had any problems with PDFs? Like, no one. But now you know. And so you can talk about how great transcripts are. And when someone's creating a new PDF, you can say, well, we need to write a summary for that PDF before it goes live so that people know what's in it before they download it. It's not that big a deal. Don't segregate those discussions into accessibility meetings, and don't wait for people to ask, like, oh, what are we doing about accessibility? Just slide that stuff in to your normal sort of workflows, and it's totally normal. It's totally like it's run-of-the-mill content stuff. This is super boring. Just weave it in. Just don't even bring attention to it. Just start doing it. It just happens to make the website better for everyone. It's totally fine. And you might be saying that, like, well, is this even part of my job? Like, who am I to become the accessibility expert in my department? But I don't really have a good answer for that, except to say, who are you not to? Thank you.